In his recent budget, Alistair Darling outlined a $15 billion saving to come from more back offices in the public sector. In the accompanying Treasury report, the evidence base for this was based on assumptions, proxies and estimates. Not very good, really, is it? In fact, all the evidence points the other way. Economies of scale is a myth. We've understood this in the private sector, so I thought I'd bring along two private sector clients to talk about the myth of economies of scale and how economy actually comes from flow, not scale. You're going to hear from Rob Brown, Director of Systems Thinking at Aviva, and Lawrence Barrett, who introduced Systems Thinking as Director of Operations for Velux UK. First of all, they're going to talk about how they fell for these ideas, because they're plausible ideas. So you'll hear from Rob and then from Lawrence on how they got seduced by these ideas of economies of scale.
Well, the idea was that the front office would have all the skills in being able to listen to customers, take all the calls and make sure that they were satisfied. Meanwhile, the back office would be experts in making sure that whatever those requests were would be done for the satisfaction of the customer. What the assumptions were behind that was if you've got all of the calls being taken, people can spend a shorter amount of time on the phone with customers, which became much cheaper as a front office, getting used to the rapport that they were building with the customers. The back office, if they could do things repetitively and quicker over and over again, one, they built up the expertise, and secondly, they would have less chance of actually getting things wrong so that the customer got things perfectly first time.
The back office function within the service department of Velux was created because we wanted functionalisation. Because the idea at that point was having mass production in the back office would make things cheaper to be able to deal with, because we wouldn't have staff being interrupted by customers. So all of the scheduling of work happened in the back office. And the assumptions that we had by doing that was that we would get economies of scale and we would get faster throughput. In addition, this would be easier to train staff because they would have a limited skill set, as well as being able to manage by the numbers that was going through the back office.
The idea of back offices was first put forward by a guy called Robert Chase in the Harvard Business Review in 1978. And as you see from what Rob and Lawrence talked about, the idea is that you have to decouple the back office from the customer. The customer is a bit of a nuisance. It stops you optimising your resources. So if you create a front end when we take in the demand from customers, we can then close off the customer, put it in an electronic package and put it off to the back office where we're going to optimise the use of our resources. That's the basic idea. In fact, it's a flawed idea. And as you might be able to tell from the way they were talking, this is really trying to manage costs. One of the things you learn as a systems thinker is when you manage costs, costs often go up. This gets revealed when you start studying your organisation as a system. It's the first step in the Vanguard method. We call it doing check. So now, Lawrence and Rob are going to describe what they learned when they started studying their organisations as systems.
What systems thinking showed us when we actually looked at the system was that the reverse was actually happening. We thought we were getting economies of scale, but what was actually happening is we were getting sub-optimisation of the work, because work was being passed between operatives from the front to the back. And that work wasn't always clean. We didn't always have the information that we needed to be able to schedule the engineer. So there was lots of time where the back office staff either had to pass work back to the front office for them to contact the customer and find out what was going on and get more information from them, or alternatively they had to phone the customer themselves. So there was lots of infighting between the two teams of getting the right information.
Systems thinking reveals something different. Two flaws in the factory-based approach. The first one is that all customer demands are the same, and actually you find that they're not. And what systems thinking has told us is that it's the customer that sets the nominal value in a service organisation, and the closer you can actually do work to the customer, the better the chances of actually getting the right response to that customer so that you improve the advocacy and the customer stays with you. The other flaw in the factory-based approach was with all the handoffs and the wrong MI driving things going faster. Actually, there was so much waste in there that people were missing the fact that actually the flow of work from a customer point of view through the organisation was more expensive than you would have first thought. So systems thinking has revealed that if we can really build a capability close to the customer to understand what their requirements are and make sure that we deliver that, measuring that in the teams, you don't actually have the flow of work at all, and it becomes actually a much more efficient way of servicing the customer in the first place.
So systems thinkers don't think about front office and back office. Systems thinkers think about designing against demand, understanding customer demand and building the expertise into the system in order to service that demand. Lawrence explains how that works.
When you actually study the demand that was coming into the organisation at that point, you could quite easily see that the number of demands that were coming in were very easy to classify. So one of the first things that we did was to make sure everybody was trained to a level of being able to handle 80% of the demand that came into the organisation at that point. The extra 20% that came in that the individual couldn't handle, then there was manager, team leaders on hand to be able to give them the assistance that they would need to actually process. It wasn't a case of passing it on to someone else, it was a case of learning that little bit on the job. So 80% of the time they could do the work that came in, to 20% of the time that they couldn't, then there'd be somebody else on hand to actually show them and work through it with them so they would learn it. And that gave a lot of job satisfaction, and the frontline team actually began to take a pride in the work that they were doing because they really did want to help the customer because they didn't have these targets that they were trying to reach in the background.
So as Lawrence is saying, you actually have to get rid of the targets that you've been using to manage the workers because it drives suboptimization. Now Rob is also going to explain you've got to get rid of all of the management information that we're used to running with because it's part of the problem, as he'll explain.
One of the things that I found really interesting in terms of system conditions is the way that MI is used and objectives are set, which fits perfectly around a command and control factory-based organisation, really driving internal measures. And I've seen internal measures be green when actually the customers are not getting what they asked for in the first place. Replacing those measures with ones that work in the teams, that are designed based on what matters to the customer, that managers close to the front line can work with and understand with the teams, is a much more powerful way of getting a lead indicator on what eventually is going to be your improved customer satisfaction.
And systems thinking gets results. We're not talking 5%, 10% improvement, we're talking major improvement.
Within 3 years, we'd saved over £1 million in operating costs by working in this new way. In addition to that, because we're in a growing market, we also was able to get 30% additional productivity out of the people on the front line. Now that seems quite amazing, but this wasn't because they were working harder, this was because they were being more effective and they had a system behind them that was able to support them rather than get in their way and they had to try and work around it. And that's really important.
Well, what I would always say is that you get morale for free in the front line. You have people who are dealing with customers, case owning, scheme owning, understanding the full piece of work from start to finish, making sure that they can deliver what the customer asks for. And it's just a much better place to work if our employees do that. I mean, we've heard them say for the first time in years they're really enjoying coming back to work.
So there we are. Systems thinking reveals what's wrong with factory designs and also provides a means to design much better services, better for the customer and much lower costs. Now your local authority is being bullied by the regime to adopt more back offices, more factory designs. Don't do it. It'll be a massive waste of taxpayers' money. Demand the evidence because I know there is none. I know of a county council that spent £6 million on these kinds of operations and their own internal report says they've got nothing from it. This is happening all over the country. My advice is don't do it, but let me leave the last word to our private sector clients.
One of the things that I would urge any manager to do is to think very hard and very long about setting up a back office. If you think you're going to get economies of scale, please learn by our mistakes that this isn't going to happen. What you need is economies of flow through your organisation. And the way to get that is to understand the demand that was being placed upon the organisation and set the system up to deal with that demand in the most easy way possible. So my experience is that when you have a back office, it creates cost, and that cost can be hidden because you don't actually see where the work is and how it's being bounced around. So what I would urge all managers to do is to really understand the work and how the customer wants to pull that demand from you. Set your organisation up to deal with that, and then you will see that you will get a very good organisation with economies of flow through their systems.
The factory-based approach with front and back office is not all it seems. Systems thinking has revealed a different set of assumptions that's really paying benefits in our part of the business, where we've really taken the bull by the horns and used that methodology in a different way.
If organisations move forward with this back office principle, thinking that they are going to get economies of scale, what will happen is a number of things. Firstly, service to your customers will get worse. Lead times will be longer. Employees will get frustrated, and costs will rise. Simple as that.